Well, good evening, and thank you so much. And thank you to the Atlanta Press Club. I am so honored to be serving as your MC tonight as we really celebrate and honor the crucial role that journalists are playing in our world, especially today. I think it's no question that 2020 has been a year unlike any that we have seen in our recent memory. So tonight, we're honoring not only the men and women who are producing the journalism right now, but we're also honoring the frontline workers. So many people who have come out, put themselves on the line, and been working day in and day out to keep our world going, and that includes working journalists. You know, this year as journalists, we have covered everything from a global pandemic to days and months of racial unrest, things like protests to politics. We've covered the deaths of thousands of fellow Americans, and we've also honored the lives and the passings of some of our heroes and icons right here in Atlanta. But the good news about all of it is that in the midst of all of those stories, there have also been moments of light. We've had moments of positivity, telling stories about Georgians and people around the country who have come together in the midst of all of this crisis to uplift our community. So I'm so honored tonight to be part of the Hall of Fame 10th anniversary and to honor a century worth of work for journalists, both here in Georgia and around the country. And before we get into our honorees tonight, let's take a look back at some of the journalists who got us here.
My name is Alyssa, and I'm a visual journalist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Each generation of journalists must face its own set of obstacles. In 2020, I was detained while covering protests in Atlanta. It was an experience that will live with me forever, but it will not define me or the work that I create. Journalists in Atlanta and around the nation were also detained and arrested. Others were called names, and some were physically attacked. With every image and headline and paragraph, we strive to be truthful and dependable, which is not easy in the face of disinformation campaigns and social media commentary. The struggle is part of what makes journalism worth doing, because we are constantly working towards something bigger than ourselves. I'm honored to be a part of this evening. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Tom Johnson. Tom is a former publisher of the Los Angeles Times and a past president of CNN. He was inducted into the Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame in 2011. Please welcome Tom.
Thank you very much. At no time in my lifetime has the responsible press been under such harsh attacks as it is now. These attacks are clear and dangerous threats to our democracy. Officials at every level during the past 4 years have attempted to withhold information and at times even to intimidate reporters from covering stories. At the same time, sadly, never before have America's newspapers been under such severe economic distress as they are today. Yet a responsible press is more critically important now for our democracy than it ever has been. We so need journalism that is accurate, journalism that is factual, journalism that is responsible, journalism that is fair, journalism that is independent, not produced and written from the left or from the right, journalism that can be trusted, journalism that is completely nonpartisan, and especially journalism that is courageous, doing the type of investigative journalism that the AJC is doing now under editor Kevin Riley. And it's really those qualities that we recognize tonight, and which I am so glad that I could sort of have a chance to participate. And I recommend that we all watch very carefully the progress of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. However, it is in the smaller local markets where the news is not good. That is where local news is so critically needed and where successful business models have not yet been discovered. Yet despite all the chaos that is taking place, I still love journalism. New technology can drive important change, important success. Young minds can discover new business models for the future, much as they were able to do so in the past. I almost wish that I could start my career over to be a part of what I think is going to be a very exciting and a very complex future. And in closing, I just want to say once again, congratulations to those who are the winners tonight. Thank all of you for your support of the Atlanta Press Club. It's important for us, I think, to have a strong press club in this community, and we have just that. So let's keep on supporting it in the days and years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Not only has 2020 been an eye-opening year for the rights of journalists across the world, but it has also opened the eyes of the world to some really groundbreaking projects, such as the New York Times 1619 Project. And it's also opened eyes to the lack of diversity in many of America's newsrooms across the country. You know, 2020 also brought fresh opportunities to give voice to those whose work had been suppressed or forgotten under the weight of systemic racism. Of course, Atlanta is a home of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. It's a place with high expectations of its journalism community, the place where Ralph McGill, the former columnist and editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, was mentioned by name in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail. And of course, it's the place where Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Reverend Bernice King held a press conference over the summer to plead for nonviolence after protests erupted in the city in the wake of the killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and Rayshard Brooks.
But pictures, especially good ones in critical times, speak to our hearts. No one alive today will ever forget George Floyd's death. That 8.5 minutes changed the whole world. And so it has been with the journalists in the city of Atlanta. We think of them as maybe uniquely Black journalists.
You know, as a journalist, spending night after night downtown, covering so much of that unrest and oftentimes being right in the middle of it, it really was unreal to see those moments play out in our city. But what was also amazing to see, for quite different reasons, was the day afterward and the many days afterward when people came out organically and brought brooms, brought crews, cleaning committees, people who said, this is my city, I want to help clean it up. And I think that really also speaks to a great deal of the heart that Atlanta truly is. You know, Atlanta's role in America's long evolving journey toward equality is both global and local, and Black journalists and Black publications have played a very specific and a very crucial role in the city's history and here in the journalism community.
And the role that the Black press has played, a constant drumbeat for equality and equal access and opportunity. And that is still important today, as we have seen from the recent demonstrations that happened across the country and across the world today in response to the police killing of particularly George Floyd in Minnesota, where he was actually killed on live television. So that brought a lot of attention to the Black Lives Matter group, which is, I think, an outgrowth of NAACP, SCLC, all of the organizations that have fought consistently for equal rights, equal opportunity, equal access. And Black media today is still providing that perspective, that voice of information that is important to this conversation.
And now we've come to the time when we get to celebrate the class of 2020. This year's Hall of Fame honorees include a photojournalist who broke barriers with his remarkable photos of civil rights leaders, a beloved bicoastal gardener who won awards with words and with roses, a legal affairs reporter with a strong pen and a keen investigative mind, and a pioneering network executive, women's rights advocate, and environmental champion who certainly knows how to be a dangerous woman.
The Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame is proud to honor 2020 inductee Boyd Lewis.
The year, 1969. The year when a 25-year-old journalist named Boyd Lewis started working for the Atlanta Voice newspaper, a seemingly unlikely pairing at first. As Lewis wrote years later, the Atlanta Voice publisher, J. Lowell Ware, hired me to be the white boy with the black press. A perfect match, as it turned out. Boyd Lewis had grown up in the South cheering the civil rights movement that many of his young friends had jeered. And after taking a total of one class in photojournalism at the University of Memphis, Lewis began his career, learning most of his journalism skills on the job. He was fearless. After a tour of service in the Vietnam War, Lewis was in his early 20s in 1960s Mississippi and working for a newspaper. And he was fired because he wrote a story that quoted witnesses who were disputing the alibi of a white police officer who had killed a black 14-year-old. By 1969, Lewis had made it to Atlanta and the Atlanta Voice, the most militant black newspaper in Atlanta, he later wrote, where race was on the docket of a transforming South during the 1970s. There I was with a notebook and free rein to say anything I damn well pleased. And of course, I had my cameras. Boyd Lewis and his cameras, his photojournalism, celebrated since for creating an astounding historical record of a city at the epicenter of the nation's post-Dr. King civil rights movement. Filmmaker and writer Jennifer Hall Lee was a teenager in Atlanta then, meeting Lewis through her activist mother.
He worked at a time in Atlanta that is so important to our entire nation. The depth of his work is amazing. His character just shines through.
But as Lewis was creating what would become his legacy, he was also still very much the overworked, underpaid journalist, contributing multiple stories and photos to each edition of The Voice and later The Inquirer, covering people and issues of critical importance to racial justice initiatives that the mainstream media of the times ignored. And back then, Lewis's work might have seemed as disposable as yesterday's newspaper. Lewis moved on to a new weekly, creative loafing, the newspaper's first news editor, and he went to work for Atlanta public radio station WABE.
Down in Atlanta, GA.
From Atlanta, Georgia, this is Southwind, a program of new sounds from the old Confederacy. I'm Boyd Lewis, producer.
Boyd Lewis again created an astonishing record of Atlanta and the South, this time on audio, in his series Southwind, that aired on WABE and NPR for more than 6 years, archived now on the Atlanta History Center's website.
And so begins Southwind.
In the mid-1990s, Lewis was a news editor and writer for CNN at the Atlanta headquarters. And after that, Boyd Lewis retired from news to become a public school teacher. But by then, the mainstream media and the public had already begun to discover Lewis's photographs from so many decades before. Tens of thousands of negatives were mostly sitting in boxes in his basement all those years. Lewis donated them to the Atlanta History Center, which archived them all, giving them new life and permanent prominence.
And you can see it in the photographs. What his work did, it was present. You feel like you're right there with people. It is immensely important to document that time.
In 2000, the Atlanta Voice compiled a retrospective of Lewis's work. In the years since, more tributes have followed, in print and on the walls of museums and public spaces. Lewis, writing in the Atlanta Voice then, a note of hope. Look at these photographs, he wrote. Look at the faces. These were determined people for determined times. These are faces of people building a new city, a better world. These photographs, if they do their job properly, can inspire those of us who remember those times, or those who wish they could, to ask, where do I go from here? Boyd Lewis, reporter, photographer, writer, whose journalism served his times and transformed into enduring art and history. The Atlanta Press Club is proud to induct Boyd Lewis into the Atlanta Press Club.
The Atlanta Press Club 2020 Hall of Fame is proud to honor 2020 inductee Pat Mitchell.
When I was a teenager.
Pat Mitchell tells the story of her youth, when she was a teen, when her father retired from the military. She says that is when her father was beginning to realize that she was becoming a dangerous woman.
He went to work in an appliance store which sold television sets, but he refused to let our family have one. He thought that television was evil and that he worried about the influence it might have on my life.
And now we all know it was Pat Mitchell, this dangerous woman, who would have a profound influence on television, creating some of the most monumental news and nonfiction programs in the history of the medium. And while she was at it, making sure she was smashing the industry wide open to women as never before, transforming broadcasting.
When she broke the glass ceiling, she threw a ladder down so others could climb up.
What a journey up that ladder. University of Georgia bachelor's and master's degrees in English Lit, UGA professor of English, then a divorced mom in the midst of the nation's seismic social changes. Pat Mitchell dangerously switched careers and dove into television news to make a different kind of impact on the world. 1972, Boston, WBZ-TV.
I remember one headline. It read,
Mitchell, amazingly, in the 1970s, managed to create news programming at WBZ involving women in all aspects of the productions. Then she left it all, daring to create her own production company.
I mean, she's the first woman in the U.S. to produce and host her own national TV show. You remember it? Woman to Woman?
Mitchell's Woman to Woman series won the Emmy for Best Daytime Talk Program. She became a regular on NBC's Today Show. Then she left it all again. Pat Mitchell left NBC to cover the stories that were calling to her. She hired her own news crew and traveled to dangerous war zones around the world and came back with stories few had told before, and none with such power. The stories of women in war. It was a groundbreaking documentary, and Mitchell sold it to NBC. And she was just getting started.
I've known Pat Mitchell I'm happy to say, for a long time. She came on board at Ted Turner's Turner Broadcasting. She was brought on to create the documentaries for his documentary division.
This is history from a global perspective.
These were like enormous multi-episode 14-hour 20-hour documentaries about the Cold War, about Cuba, about Vietnam, about women. Just amazing.
From her early days as documentary producer for some of the finest pieces of work in television today, they still stand the test of time.
One of the definitive records, if not the definitive records, of the Cold War period. My dear friend Pat Mitchell and Sir Jeremy Isaacs.
Thank you very much.
This English lit major turned TV reporter and producer, always reaching higher, creating and leading and inspiring entire teams of talent to magnify her storytelling exponentially.
Pat Mitchell took over today as president of the Public Broadcasting Service.
The first woman president and CEO of both PBS and then the Paley Center for Media, creator of the TED Women series for TED.com, showcasing ideas from women, and author of the book she titled, of course, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
If there was a Pat Mitchell, well, there is nobody but Pat. If Pat could multiply herself and could run CNN and PBS and a host of other media institutions, the world would be a much better place. I'm so proud of her. She is the real deal.
Pat Mitchell is a trailblazer, not just for women throughout her entire life and career, but she's an activist. She is an activist for women.
My inspiration and all.
When she opened the door to women in the industry, she made sure that door stayed open. And it's quite something for a girl from Swainsboro, Georgia. She's come a long way, baby. And in the vernacular of the kids today, she's a boss, a real boss.
The Atlanta Press Club is proud to induct Pat Mitchell into the Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame.
In the 60 years that I have known Pat Mitchell, I have either delivered or listened to many splendid conventional introductions. This is not such a day. I want you to know Pat as I do. When I was a leader of the Sigma Nu fraternity at the University of Georgia, we elected then Patsy as our sweetheart. It was a unanimous vote. What we brothers admired the most about Pat were these. She was, and she still is, a spectacular dancer. She was, and she still is, beautiful. She was, and still is, brilliant. The pretty Patsy Enfield of Swainsboro became the powerful Pat, who has made our world, especially the world of women, where she is on the forefront of women's rights issues today. She's made our world far better than she found it. And I would just say to the dangerous women in the audience or on the Zoom, and even the dangerous men, please welcome a great hero of mine and a longtime personal friend.
I'm honored and humbled to have such personal heroes as Tom Johnson and Monica Pearson as part of this presentation, and my good friend Jane Fonda, and all the friends and family who show their support in so many ways, including supporting the Atlanta Press Club's Hall of Fame, Atlanta's vibrant and award-winning media community. I'm grateful to be invited into the Hall of Fame with colleagues whose work exemplifies Atlanta's journalistic tradition of brave editors, risk-taking photographers, and fact-driven reporters. It's very special to me, too, that this program is being broadcast on public television, reflecting the commitment of public television and radio to serve this community as GPB does with media that matters. I could not have envisioned such a moment when I left my teaching job at the University of Georgia to pursue work as a journalist, first in print and then on television. Eventually and happily, my media career brought me back to Atlanta, where I was privileged to lead the visionary Ted Turner's groundbreaking documentary unit, producing some work, some of which was awarded the University of Georgia's prestigious Peabody Awards. I'm thinking tonight about the transformational changes that all of us as a community of media makers and media consumers have experienced, and changes we continue to experience during a global pandemic that makes it necessary for us to be together like this rather than in person.
Congressman Lewis's fight for freedom was clear and constant. And his fight was disarming because he fought with love. Love for everyone. His blood and tears watered the ground on which we now stand. Our country is indebted for his sacrifices. It is a debt that can never be fully paid. A man boasted to me that he saw the congressman on the street one day, and he took a picture with him. I burst his bubble, I'm sure, when I responded, "John took pictures with everyone." How proud John would be today if he knew that we did just what he asked us to do. His last words to us were, "Vote like you never voted before." And we did just that. We can never forget the man who many people refer to as the conscience of the nation. He was our friend. We'll always love him, even his memory.
The Atlanta Press Club would like to thank the Coca-Cola Company for its role in this special 10th anniversary broadcast of the 2020 Hall of Fame celebration. With special thanks to the Home Depot, the Southern Company, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, and these generous partners.